hey, if I sell the world, I may be able to finance my film, but I make very little from it. I make only my 10% that I did for doing the film, which was in the budget. Okay. So, but I've sold 50% of the film. I have some tax credits that are giving me 30%. I'm missing 10, 15, 20%.
There is a, quote, gap in your budget.
There's a gap.
Right?
Yeah. And as easy or as hard, if you want, okay, as we just said the word gap, someone came up with the concept of gap financing. Gap financing itself is I haven't sold the world. I've sold half the world or 25% of the world. I have 75% of the world left. That's my economic value of my film. That 75%, if you look at the 25 that I sold, right, should be worth, I don't know, 200% of my budget, 300% of my budget. If I calculate what I pre-sold plus the estimates that I got from sales agents, like you said, the sales agents have been doing this for years, so they may know comedy film starring these people. We looked at the Hollywood Stock Exchange. Those people are generating a certain amount of money from their films and so forth. So we estimate that the rest of the world is worth 300% of what you're missing. There'll be someone who says, hey, I'll lend you money for that. I'll lend you money, but I want to be out right away because I'm the last money in to gap finance. I fill the gap, let's call it. But once you start making sales, I want to be the first money out. So interesting. We just got ourselves 100% financed. We didn't pre-sell the world, but I got somebody who give me a gap financing. Sounds like a really great deal now, right?
Well, there's also something called super gap. I will add for all of you out there, super gap is not a kind of gap financing that wears a cape and flies. It's something very, very different. I don't know if you want to go into that.
Well, the super gap means that the percentage is higher, right? So that there's a certain risk being taken by that gap financier, because the more gap you have, the greater risk there is that somebody actually can lose money.
Well, also, if you have a gap facility and a super gap facility, gap tends to be repayable sooner in time than super gap, right? So basically, the higher you go, gap is riskier than pre-sales, and super gap is riskier than gap.
So the advantage we have with this gap financing is now all of a sudden we got the money. Okay, we're financed. We haven't pre-sold the entire world. Okay, but the gap, the one condition that gap financier gave you, okay, is he or she or it is the first one getting repaid, right? So when you go out to the markets, like we said, we're at the American film market, we're in Cannes, we're in TIFF, and we're receiving an offer for this film. And it says, for Italy, I'll pay you $100,000 or $500,000 for Italy. Somewhere in that gap deal was written that the gap financier had to approve that sale. So you no longer own the film. You no longer run that bus. You no longer have control of where you're making that sale. The gap, because the gap is now taking the risk, makes that decision for you. So on the one hand, you ended up financing your film by getting that gap financing in, but you gave up what is called the control of the bus or the control of making that sale. Because maybe what you would say as the producer is, I'm not happy with $500,000 for that country, okay? Because I think I can get more, right? And we'll go to the next market. We don't have to sell it at this market. There's another one coming. Remember, we said you can be literally all year at different markets, okay? And the gap says, no, I'm taking that sale. Why? Because he put up the money under the contract that you're going to sign with him. He chooses which sale he makes.